Well, okay there, my friends in the Mechanicus and outside of the Mechanicus, and some dudes who just have, you know, a couple of tin cans strapped to their legs. It's me, your cat, Catte, and I am here today to talk to you about the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Mechanicum, and why they're technically different things, and also cool guy stuff. And as you can see here, this is me as a tech priest. There's all kinds of wires and tubes and thugs. Isn't that neat? I think it's pretty neat. Sometimes when you want to be 2B, you gotta get into the tech priesty things, yeah? Anyway, who are the Admech? The Adeptus Mechanicus is a cult of machine folks who worship the Omnissiah. The Adeptus Mechanicus is where the Imperium gets its technology as well as its scientists and engineers. The Adeptus Mechanicus has its priests present throughout the Imperium and represent one of the most powerful groups within the Imperium. Now, something that's kind of interesting here, as we'll get into, is that the Admech used to be the Mechanicum, and the Mechanicum, when it was a thing, was actually technically separate from the Imperium. Like, they were working together, but it was two empires working together, not just one. It's part of the reason that they have so much more freedom in the Imperium in terms of various different beliefs, rather than, you know, what the standard byline is in the Imperium, which is, hey, you gotta worship the Emperor in a particular way and blah, 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 blah. And you can also see that one of the big things with the Adeptus Mechanicus is that they love technology and they love cybernetic augmentation. This is not necessarily the entirely universal on like the level of augmentation, but you can see here that this person is like barely recognizable as a human anymore. They got a big drill thingy. I would say that the drill thingy doesn't seem like it would actually be that useful of a thing if that's all it does, unless like you drill just a lot. And like a lot of these hands make it kind of look like they have a hard time doing manipulative things with their hands, but hey, you know, people like that. And there's also, you know, neat stuff with they like red robes. Who is the Omnissiah? The Adeptus Mechanicus are not bound by the Imperial cult and instead worship the machine gun, also known as the Omnissiah. The Omnissiah is said to be the source of all knowledge and technology in the universe. The Emperor is often considered a living avatar of the Omnissiah, or sometimes just the Omnissiah himself. Knowledge is the true manifestation of divinity within the universe, according to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, there's a couple things that are kind of interesting about this. So basically, all knowledge, no matter how minuscule or unimportant, is said to come from the Omnissiah. It is said that the Omnissiah put out all information in the universe, and basically the most holy act is to discover this information and, you know, work with it. Now, there's some cults in the Mechanicus that are somewhat popular, which are much more about like the ancients had it all right, and then new technology is like bad. You shouldn't be doing new technology, you should be going after the ancient stuff. It's a whole thing. The Emperor is also kind of interesting because there are some Space Marines and others that are basically like Trinitarians, where it's like the Omnissiah, the Emperor, and there's some other stuff going on. It's kind of interesting. And the actual opinion on the Emperor being the Omnissiah or not is kind of all over the place within the Adeptus Mechanicus. In the early Mechanicum, it was even more divided, with some people just straight up not even believing that the Emperor was the Omnissiah or not. And there is some of that to the modern day. But it's a little complicated. So these are the mysteries and the warnings of the cult Mechanicus. These are things that basically form the foundation of their religion. Life is directed motion. The spirit is a spark of life. These two things kind of go together to imply that basically all motion forward is, you know, that's what life actually is. It is directed motion. It is the motion that is directed either by yourself or by an external force. Sentience is the ability to learn the value of knowledge. Intellect is the understanding of knowledge. Sentience is the basest form of intellect. Basically, they're implying that if something is not sentient, it cannot actually be intelligent, which that's a fair enough statement. Understanding is a true path to comprehension. Comprehension is the key to all things. The Omnissiah knows all and comprehends all. So they're on this goal, or their main goal is to try and understand and comprehend the universe and comprehend the various different things within the universe. And people will take on various different understandings of what exactly the Omnissiah actually wants from them. But this is largely influenced by the warnings of the cult Mechanicus, as you can see right here. The alien mechanism is a perversion of the true path. This is something that I'm just gonna tell you right now. The most hardcore like conservative in the cult Mechanicus would definitely believe this, but you can see plenty of examples of people within the Mechanicus or the Mechanicum playing around with alien technology. This is one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's a stated rule, but how many people actually follow it? It's kind of all over the place. The soul is the consciousness of sentience. The soul is the conscience of sentience. A soul can be bestowed only by the Omnissiah. The soul of sentience, i.e. artificial general intelligence, is the enemy of all. Within the Imperium... Nope, can't... There you go. Within the Imperium and the Mechanicus as well, AI is just considered like an evil bad thing due to the uprising of the Men of Iron and things like that. I would argue that this doesn't all necessarily make sense, because if an AI becomes sentient, wouldn't it have come from the Omnissiah still, if the Omnissiah is the one that bestows souls? But hey, whatever. The knowledge of the ancients stands beyond question. The machine spirit guards the knowledge of the ancients. They basically believe that all machines have like a machine spirit within them, which is like a sentience that can be like communicated with and things like that. Now, of course, once again, the thing that's weird about that is, why is that any different from an AI? Blah. The flesh is fallible, but ritual honors the machine spirit. So even if you don't get like hyper augmentations, you can still honor the machine spirit with ritual. To break the ritual is to break with the faith. I would say that all of these are in various different degrees, depending on how much individuals within the Mechanicum and or the Mechanicus actually follow these. It's kind of all over the place. Some people follow these to the letter. There is no room for debate. There is no room to deviate from these. And then other people are very willing to like play around with alien technology, for instance. Some people are willing to play around with AI, even though that's a big no-no. Or, it also kind of depends, The Mechanicum. So the Mechanicum was the original name for the machine cult before it officially joined with the Imperium. Originally, the Mechanicum and the Imperium were considered two separate empires which relied on each other and supported each other. The Mechanicum warranted a degree of independence because without them, the Imperium could not function. The Mechanicum was basically what allowed the Imperium to actually exist as it does and to spread out and to become more and more advanced and things like that. The Emperor is reliant on the Mechanicum for their forge worlds and things like that to actually supply his legions. The beliefs of the Mechanicum was much more varied in what exactly it believed. People were kind of all over the place. Some people believed, almost strictly like the mysteries and the warnings as I described, but some believed the Emperor to be the Omnissiah, some did not, and others went so far as to lack a belief in the Omnissiah altogether. In the 9th book of the Horus Heresy, there is a book called Mechanicum, where we actually meet someone who is a big head, not like a head honcho, but is pretty advanced in the Mechanicum, who just straight up does not believe in the Omnissiah at all. She was describing her understanding of like, look, if two things move because of the laws of the universe, is that actually the will of the Omnissiah, or is that simply the laws of the universe? The vast majority still held to the core tenets of the cult Mechanicus, despite what minor differences different subcults may have had. And people are kind of all over the place in this. There were a lot of people in the Mechanicum who believed that the Emperor was not just straight up not the Omnissiah, and was not even really related to the Omnissiah. And a lot of those would end up joining the Dark Mechanicum, or what is sometimes referred to as the True Mechanicum. The downfall of the Mechanicum. During the Horus Heresy, the leader of Mechanicum sided with Horus. That was Catte Howdy, who was a big weirdo. This caused a civil war to start on Mars with numerous casualties on both sides, but eventually the heretics would take over. After the Horus Heresy, Mars would be recaptured. So pretty early on, Catte Howdy was doing a lot of secret projects for the Traitor Legions. He was working on some very large ships. He was deliberately taking supplies that should be going to the Loyalist Legions and sending them to the Traitor Legions. He was also just keeping supplies from them in general. He was making it way more difficult for the Salamanders, as an example of one, or Blood Angels as well, to actually stay supplied because so much of their stuff was like coming straight from Mars, or dictated like where supplies would go from Mars itself. This was actually a blow against the Loyalists early on that would make it much more difficult for them to fight against the Dark Mechanicum and, of course, Horus. The brother of the Adeptus Mechanicus. After the heresy of the Mechanicum would be integrated with the Adeptus Terra, the Fabricator General is one of the High Lords of Terra. Thanks to the Treaty of Mars, they still maintain quite a bit of independence within the Imperium. So, now, where the Mechanicum was technically a separate entity, the Adeptus Mechanicus is a part of the Adeptus Terra, which is the government body of pretty much the entire Imperium. Originally, there was not a High Lord of Terra for the Mechanicum, but with the Mechanicum becoming the Adeptus Mechanicus after the recapture of Mars, the Fabricator General of Mars became a High Lord of Terra. The current High Lord of Terra is this weirdo. Apparently he's gotten so many augmentations that at this point he's basically just a giant functioning factory, and you can't really move him, so there's some questions about how he actually attends to stuff with the High Lords, but still. It's kind of interesting, and I would argue this is a part that's very interesting to me. I'll move my kitty just so you can see. This guy here, this is Arkan Land. And you can see he's not very mechanical, or not like entirely cybernetic. Do tech priests give up their humanity? There's actually a pretty wide variety of beliefs, especially within the Mechanicum, and maybe a little less wide in the modern Adeptus Mechanicus, but augmentation among tech priests can actually take on a wide variety of shapes. And there's a couple of examples here I thought were interesting. In the Kaivis Caine novels, there are some tech priests which maintain a mostly human appearance, and there are even hints of a romantic dalliance between Caine and her. There's a specific tech priest that she's mostly, at least on the surface, appears to be mostly still human. She did have augmatics, and she had like mechadendrites. Mechadendrites are like just basically tentacles of like mechanical tentacles that can interact with various different objects. In the Mechanicum book, there is a tech priestess who keeps a largely female-looking human body while maintaining augmentation. She's still augmented, but the characters are described as you can see the swells of her breasts and her hips, and you can tell that she is very clearly like female. Whereas you get other kinds of augmentations, which basically people start to look less and less like you can identify their gender, for instance, less and less, like at least their physical sex. Their gender can take on a whole variety of terms and things like that, obviously, but it's kind of all over the place. Arkan Land, for instance, is a good example of someone who maintains a largely human appearance, and there are other tech priests who do the same, who basically they would consider like the idea that, like, if they, especially some who believe that the Emperor is like an avatar of the Omnissiah or the Omnissiah, like they see him as he's very human appearing. He doesn't have like just a ton of crazy random augmentation all over, and they believe that there are some that believe that the human form is sacred, and it is like actually like a blessing from the Omnissiah. So to get too deviant in terms of like augmentation is actually kind of a sin. This is, of course, a minority opinion. Most tech priests you'll see are kind of like way more augmented than that. They're not like Arkan Land. They're usually much closer to the Fabricator General than Arkan Land. Innovation. The knowledge of the ancients is beyond question is one of the warnings of the Cult Mechanicus that we went over earlier. Innovation is not impossible, though many consider it undesirable. Call is an example of an innovator who got ahead. Now, the idea here is also a little bit different depending on what lore you're taking for like 100% solid and what lore you're not. It's certainly not like the Mechanicus does not innovate and does not create new things and does not, do stuff like that. The lore, especially as it was represented in the older stuff, is that like, no, there's no innovation at all, and even if you innovate, you have to pretend that you discovered like an SEC. That's not really the case. As far as I can see, most examples I've seen in like the Black Library books don't really hold that as the standard. I don't even really think... I think there's kind of a conflict there between like the story, like the grander idea of like, oh, you can't innovate at all, nothing can change, versus constant innovation, which seems to be a thing. Like, you see examples of it all the time. You see examples of new technology. You see examples of things changing, and you see examples of individual tech priests like building new devices. But of course, in the larger lore, it's like, no, they're not allowed to innovate at all. It's like, I would say that's much more debatable than some people act like it is. And especially if you're just, like I said, you start reading a lot of Black Library books, you can see that they're all over the place. And yes, the knowledge of the ancients is held as like paramount and above all, but you can still make things that are different. The Void Dragon. This is also an interesting bit of lore here. The Void Dragon is locked up beneath the surface of Mars with a guardian who watches it for the last 10,000 years, and sometime before that, the previous guardian was. The previous guardian is believed to have been selected by the Emperor. The Void Dragon is a Necron Catan. The Emperor attempted to kill the Void Dragon back in the day and ended up having to lock it away under Mars instead. So Catan, in case you don't know, is basically a Star Eater god of the Necrons. They would feed, originally they fed on stars, but then they discovered that feeding on souls was much more tasty. But the Void Dragon is like a mechanical, very strictly a mechanical Catan. It manipulates technology, can take over technologies and things like that. It is locked away under Mars with currently a lady and a tech adept watching over it. I'm pretty sure that that hasn't changed yet. So, and you can read a little bit more about like what's actually going on there in the Mechanicum book. From the Horus Heresy series. Adeptus Mechanicus does understand some technology. Though some technology is lost and it is not known how to rebuild it, large amounts of the technology of the Imperium is understood. Some things are not understood at all, though. It is possible for Adeptus Mechanicus to rebuild some things. Now, this is once again another thing that's kind of all over the place in lore, because it's frequently implied that like by like just like the base standard that like, oh man, they don't understand their technology at all, they can't do any of it, they all think it's just crazy rituals and things like that. Well, first off, the rituals actually work simply by the belief and the fact that like enough people keep it going. Machine spirits are real. Like, I think it gets harder and harder, especially as the lore has progressed, to argue that machine spirits are not a thing. Secondly, yes, they're perfectly capable of maintaining and building certain technology. Some stuff they're not able to just rebuild. It depends on like the level of technology and what exactly we're talking about. Some technology is also just straight up hoarded by the Adeptus Mechanicus, especially like the higher ups. So some stuff is actually able to be rebuilt, but they don't want you to rebuild it. It gets way more complicated. Now, is that to say that they understand everything in the Imperium? No, but largely it's also not that difficult to rebuild certain things. If you build them in the first place and you have Forge Worlds dedicated to building like thousands of Lehman Russes or like ship parts or things like that, you clearly have some understanding of how it works. The idea that they don't understand it at all is kind of a meme, and it's a meme that I don't really think makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. But it is something that's very interesting to understand that they have lost some things, just not quite on the level that the memes sometimes take it. Oh, and these are some fun facts. I almost want to say this guy looks like he might be more Dark Mechanicum, but because of the spooky script, but I don't know. Adeptus Mechanicus has Nikola Tesla's skull. This is actually funny. If you it was an item that you could take, and I think the 8th edition codex, I don't know if it's in the new ones, but you could take it, and it was basically just like a skull that you chanted to until it like zapped people, and it's implied to be Nikola Tesla's skull. The Landspeeder and the Land Raider are named after Ark and Land. They are not named the Landspeeder and the Land Raider because they rate on our speed across the land. No, they're named that because the guy named Ark and Land was the one that discovered them, which is pretty silly. It's like probably one of the silliest little new additions to the lore in the last little while. They sometimes take back the augmentations of the dead. So they have these special... sometimes they have whole worlds dedicated to this. They're basically cemetery worlds where they will bury people... but they will take back certain augmentations, sometimes all of their augmentations, and just bear like a skull, basically. And it's kind of funny to see that. Tech priests have their own areas of interest and studies, which they sometimes turn into weird hobbies. There's several mentions of this in various different books. One is that there's a CAT, which is basically these little robots that they can have go out and do specific tasks for them. And there's a mention of it where there's like one person, just their hobby was just to modify those. Or sometimes they have hobbies where it's just like, oh, they want to research the perfect orc killing like bacteria that they can release into an atmosphere that will only target orcs. There's all kinds of fun little things, and you can, if you want to make a tech priest, you can have them have like a weird little hobby that they're into. Anyway, thank you very much for stopping by, and yes, praise the Omnissiah and praise God. Thank you so very much for checking this out. I hope you enjoyed it. The song in the background, if you're wondering, is Children of the Omnissiah. It is from a game called Mechanicus, which is pretty fun. Well, or at least I've seen it, and it looks pretty fun. I have not actually played it. I probably should, actually. But yeah, I hope that you all enjoyed that, and if you have more stuff that you'd like to hear about, hey, let me know. And you can tell me what's your favorite little thing about the Mechanicus. All right, I love you all, and God loves you, and the machine god loves you, and bye-bye, I love you, bye, have a great one.